In a smoke-filled nightclub, a powerful mafia boss tried to humiliate Sammy Davis Jr. in front of Hollywood's elite. What happened next shocked everyone and redefined loyalty forever. Stay till the end, subscribe now, and witness courage silence fear. The nightclub glowed with cigarette smoke, clinking glasses, and low murmurs of money and influence. It was the early 1960s, when Las Vegas was ruled not just by entertainers, but by unseen men who decided who stayed and who disappeared. On this particular night, every performer sensed tension before it arrived. Then the doors opened. A mafia boss entered slowly, surrounded by silence and respect earned through fear. Conversations died mid-sentence. Waiters froze. Even the music softened, as if the room itself understood hierarchy. Sammy Davis Jr. was already seated, smiling politely, dressed sharp, but aware. He had learned early that talent did not protect you from humiliation. Being a black Jewish entertainer in America meant success came paired with danger. The boss's eyes found Sammy instantly. Not because Sammy had done anything wrong, but because power seeks targets it believes won't resist. The table went quiet. Everyone watched. In those days, nobody challenged men like this. Careers ended with a whisper. Lives ended with a nod. Sammy felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the warning every minority learned to recognize. He stayed composed, masking decades of insults behind charm. Across the room, Dean Martin noticed. He had seen fear before, worn it, outrun it. What he saw now wasn't just tension. It was a test unfolding in real time, one that would force a choice between safety and loyalty. Sammy Davis Jr. had learned to survive by being extraordinary. From childhood, he understood that talent was his armor in a world eager to remind him he didn't belong. Applause opened doors, but it never erased the whispers behind them. Even at the height of his fame, Sammy was denied hotel rooms, mocked in private clubs, and tolerated rather than welcomed. Vegas loved his performances, but not always his presence. Every smile he gave was measured, every joke calculated to diffuse tension before it exploded. That night, sitting beneath crystal lights, Sammy felt history pressing down on him. He had entertained presidents, kings, and criminals, yet respect remained conditional. The mafia boss leaned in, his voice calm, carrying the confidence of someone unused to consequences. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They dripped with insult, carefully chosen to remind Sammy of his place. Laughter followed, nervous and forced. Sammy smiled, because survival demanded it. Inside, something cracked. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of shrinking to keep others comfortable. Tired of pretending humiliation was harmless. He glanced around the room, knowing no one would intervene. No one ever did. Except one man, sitting casually nearby, swirling a drink, watching everything with sharp, unreadable eyes. Dean Martin had built his life on charm, but beneath it lived a code that never tolerated cruelty. Dean Martin was known as a clown, a drunk, a charmer who floated through life smiling. That reputation protected him. People underestimated him, and Dean preferred it that way. Behind the jokes lived discipline shaped by hardship, loyalty forged in unforgiving streets. He understood power because he had brushed against it without worshiping it. Dean knew who controlled Vegas, knew the rules everyone followed to stay alive. He also knew which rules were worth breaking. Watching Sammy endure humiliation stirred something personal. Dean had seen injustice wrapped in laughter too many times. He had laughed along when required, but never at the expense of a friend's dignity. As the boss continued, the room leaned into discomfort, hoping silence would end the moment. Dean felt the calculation happening inside him. Intervening meant risk. Real risk. Not headlines or gossip, but consequences whispered in alleys. Yet loyalty meant more to Dean than safety. Sammy wasn't just a performer. He was family. The Rat Pack wasn't branding. It was brotherhood. Dean took a slow sip of his drink, buying time, choosing his words carefully. When he finally stood, chairs scraped softly. Heads turned. No one expected him to speak. The music stopped completely. Dean smiled, the same smile audiences adored, but his eyes carried steel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult back. He did something far more dangerous. He drew a line. Dean Martin walked toward the table with relaxed confidence, as if nothing unusual was happening. That calm was unsettling. Powerful men were used to fear, not ease. Dean placed a hand on Sammy's shoulder, a silent signal of solidarity that spoke louder than words. Then he addressed the boss directly, voice smooth, conversational, deadly serious. He reminded him, politely, that Sammy was his guest, his brother, and under his protection. The phrasing was careful. No threats, no insults, just a statement of fact. The room froze. Everyone understood what had just happened. Dean hadn't challenged authority openly. He had reframed it. If harm came to Sammy, it would ripple outward. The boss studied Dean, measuring him. This wasn't a performer begging for mercy. This was a man unafraid of consequences. Silence stretched. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, the boss laughed. Not because he was amused, but because backing down gracefully was the only move left. He waved it off, muttered something dismissive, and leaned back. The danger passed. Music resumed. Conversations returned, shakier than before. Sammy exhaled, stunned. Dean returned to his seat, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. That moment became legend not because of violence, but because dignity had been defended without spectacle. In a world ruled by fear, Dean Martin proved courage could be quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective. After the music returned, nothing felt the same. Laughter sounded thinner, conversations cautious. Everyone in the room understood that something invisible had shifted. Silence had spoken louder than threats ever could. Dean Martin's intervention wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. In Las Vegas, reputation traveled faster than truth, and that night's story would move quietly through casinos, dressing rooms, and back corridors. The mafia boss didn't retaliate because he couldn't afford to. Dean had made the situation bigger than ego. By standing beside Sammy, he had forced witnesses to exist. Harm could no longer happen unseen. Sammy sat quietly, absorbing the moment. For the first time in a long while, he hadn't swallowed humiliation alone. That mattered more than applause. The message wasn't about dominance, it was about boundaries. Power thrives in isolation. Dean shattered that by refusing to look away. Performers nearby pretended nothing had happened, but inside they were shaken. Many had endured similar moments and stayed silent. Watching someone intervene rewired assumptions about survival. The boss eventually left, his exit lacking the earlier authority. Dean didn't celebrate. He finished his drink and joked with the band, returning the room to normalcy. But history had already been written. The silence after his words lingered longer than any psalm. It reminded everyone present that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. Later that night, away from the lights, Sammy replayed the moment repeatedly. He wasn't naive enough to believe one act erased a lifetime of prejudice. But something inside him had shifted. For years, he had believed endurance was his only option. Smile, perform, survive. Dean's choice challenged that belief. It suggested dignity could be defended, even in hostile rooms. Sammy felt gratitude mixed with disbelief. Dean hadn't asked permission. He hadn't waited for approval. He had acted instinctively, valuing loyalty over safety. That realization stayed with Sammy longer than the applause ever did. He understood the risk Dean took. Vegas was built on fragile alliances. Breaking unspoken rules invited consequences. Yet Dean never mentioned it again. That quiet was its own gift. It allowed Sammy to keep his pride intact. The next time Sammy walked on stage, something was different. His confidence felt less borrowed. He stood taller, knowing someone had seen his worth without conditions. That knowledge didn't make the world fairer, but it made it bearable. Over time, Sammy would speak about brotherhood, not victimhood. He credited moments like this for his resilience. History often remembers speeches and protests. It forgets private acts that reshape identity. That night, Sammy learned respect doesn't always come from demanding it. Sometimes it arrives when someone else refuses to let you be diminished. Las Vegas in that era functioned on invisible contracts. Performers dazzled audiences while staying obedient to forces behind the curtain. Everyone knew the hierarchy, even if nobody named it aloud. Crossing those lines could end bookings, careers, or worse. Dean Martin knew those rules intimately. He had navigated them for years, balancing charm with caution. His move wasn't reckless, it was strategic. He didn't insult the boss or challenge authority publicly. He reframed respect as mutual. That distinction mattered. By keeping his tone calm, Dean allowed the boss an exit without losing face. It was a masterclass in survival and defiance. Word spread carefully. No headlines. No gossip columns. Just knowing looks and whispered admiration. Other performers felt safer, not because danger vanished, but because precedent had been set. Someone had intervened and lived. That mattered. The mafia didn't respond with violence because violence would have drawn attention. Dean's popularity complicated retaliation. He was too visible, too beloved. Power hates exposure. That night taught a subtle lesson. Protection could come from unity, not submission. Vegas continued as always, but the balance shifted slightly. Dean Martin wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He was someone who wouldn't be easily controlled. That reputation followed him quietly, granting respect without demands. In a city built on fear, restraint became its own rebellion. The Rat Pack thrived on humor and chaos, but beneath the laughter was genuine loyalty. To outsiders, it looked like indulgence. To those inside, it was survival. Dean, Sammy, Frank, and the rest protected each other in ways the public rarely saw. That night reinforced what brotherhood truly meant. It wasn't about sharing stages or headlines. It was about standing up when it was dangerous. Dean never framed himself as a hero. He dismissed the incident with jokes, deflecting attention away from Sammy. That mattered. True solidarity doesn't seek praise. Sammy responded the same way. He didn't publicize the moment or turn it into mythology. He carried it privately, allowing it to strengthen him quietly. Over the years, their bond deepened. They trusted each other with more than careers. They trusted each other with dignity. Audiences sensed that authenticity, even if they didn't understand its roots. When they performed together, there was an unspoken confidence that came from mutual respect. The world often reduces these men to symbols of glamour. It forgets the risks they navigated daily. This moment wasn't glamorous. It was tense, fragile, human, and it revealed character more clearly than any performance. Brotherhood, in its truest form, doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes it's a calm voice, a steady hand, and the courage to say, "Not tonight." Although no newspapers reported the incident, Hollywood noticed. Stories like this traveled through dressing rooms, private parties, and late-night phone calls. Actors, musicians, and producers whispered about what Dean Martin had done, not with shock, but with admiration. In an industry built on ego, loyalty stood out. People understood the risk without it being explained. Standing up to hidden power wasn't symbolic, it was dangerous. Dean's reputation subtly evolved. He was still the charming crooner, but now there was something else beneath the smile. A quiet strength that made people pause. Producers treated him differently, more carefully. Not out of fear, but respect. Sammy felt that shift too. Doors didn't suddenly fly open, but resistance softened. Some people thought twice before testing him. Others avoided him altogether, unwilling to be the next story whispered behind closed doors. That was enough. Hollywood thrived on perception, and perception had changed. The lesson was subtle but powerful. Alliances mattered. Not contracts, not money, but who would stand beside you when it counted. Dean never capitalized on the moment. He didn't demand favors or leverage influence. That restraint enhanced his credibility. People trusted him because he didn't trade integrity for advantage. In a business obsessed with visibility, Dean proved the strongest moves were often invisible. The incident became a quiet reference point, a reminder that character still mattered, even in rooms where morality felt negotiable. Many wondered why the mafia boss didn't retaliate later. The answer was simple but uncomfortable. Power calculates risk constantly. Dean Martin represented too many variables. He was loved by audiences, protected by popularity, and connected to influential figures, far beyond one room. Targeting him would invite attention, something organized power avoids unless necessary. More importantly, Dean hadn't humiliated the boss. He hadn't challenged him publicly or provoked a loss of face. He had offered an exit. That restraint mattered. Respect, even among criminals, followed its own code. The boss recognized that escalation would only expose weakness. Dean had turned the situation into a mutual stalemate without raising his voice. That was rare. It demanded acknowledgement. Retaliation would rewrite the narrative, shifting blame onto the boss. Silence preserved control. For Sammy, this reality was sobering. Protection came not from justice, but from balance. That understanding didn't breed cynicism, it bred clarity. The world wasn't fair, but it was predictable. Dean understood those mechanics instinctively. He didn't romanticize danger or underestimate it. He navigated it with precision. That's why the moment worked. It wasn't emotional bravado. It was calculated courage. The boss backed down because losing quietly was better than losing visibly. Dean ensured that was the only choice left. Dean Martin rarely spoke about principles, but he lived by them. Growing up with little taught him the value of loyalty early. He distrusted systems, but trusted people who earned it. That night wasn't an exception, it was consistency. Dean believed humiliation was a line that should never be crossed. You could insult talent, question ability, even threaten careers. But dignity was sacred. Watching Sammy targeted awakened something unmovable inside him. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. Dean's humor often masked seriousness. But when he acted, it was deliberate. He didn't see himself as brave. He saw the alternative as unacceptable. Living with himself mattered more than safety. That internal code guided many unseen choices throughout his life. People mistook his casual attitude for indifference. In truth, it was discipline. He chose when to engage and when to retreat. That discernment defined his longevity. Standing up that night wasn't reckless rebellion. It was alignment with who he was. Sammy later understood this deeply. Dean hadn't acted because Sammy was famous. He acted because Sammy was human. That distinction mattered. It transformed the moment from celebrity drama into moral clarity. Codes like Dean's aren't loud. They don't demand recognition. They reveal themselves quietly, exactly when needed. Years passed, but the memory never faded. For Sammy, it became a reference point during moments of doubt. Whenever he faced subtle exclusion or open insult, he remembered someone had once refused to let him stand alone. That memory fortified him. For Dean, the night blended into many others, but its meaning lingered. He never regretted it. Not once. In later interviews, both men spoke often about friendship, never naming specifics. They didn't need to. The truth lived between them. Audiences saw chemistry on stage, not realizing it was reinforced by trust forged off stage. That night shaped how they moved through the world. It reminded them that courage wasn't always rewarded, but it was always necessary. Younger performers, unaware of the story, benefited indirectly from its ripple effects. Boundaries had been tested and redrawn, not dramatically, but meaningfully. History often overlooks moments without spectacle. There were no headlines, no arrests, no applause. Yet this quiet stand mattered. It demonstrated that even in environments ruled by fear, individual choices still carried weight. The night didn't change Vegas. It changed two men. And sometimes that's enough. Because dignity defended once echoes longer than humiliation endured repeatedly. That understanding followed them until the end, shaping legacies built not just on talent, but on humanity. After that night, Sammy Davis Jr. didn't become louder or angrier. He became steadier. The change was subtle but permanent. He no longer mistook silence for weakness. He understood that dignity could exist even when the world resisted it. That realization influenced how he treated others, especially young performers entering hostile spaces. Sammy became intentional about encouragement, knowing how rare it was. He didn't lecture or dramatize. He modeled confidence. When faced with discrimination, he chose battles carefully, refusing to shrink instinctively. Dean's intervention had shown him that respect wasn't always requested. Sometimes it was claimed through presence. Sammy's performances deepened. Audiences sensed something grounded beneath the showmanship. His humor carried less apology. His voice carried more certainty. Privately, he spoke about friendship as a lifeline, not a luxury. The industry continued testing him, but he no longer felt isolated. That mattered. He understood that even one ally could alter power dynamics. Over time, Sammy's reputation grew not just as a performer, but as a man of integrity. He paid the lesson forward quietly, stepping in when he could, speaking when it mattered. The night in Vegas didn't erase injustice. It gave him a compass, and that compass guided him through decades, where standing tall remained an act of resistance. Dean Martin's legacy is often wrapped in nostalgia, but moments like this reveal its deeper substance. He wasn't an activist or a moral crusader. He didn't seek change through speeches. He lived his values in private, where applause was absent. That made his choices more honest. Dean understood influence differently. He knew when to use it and when to let it fade. Standing up for Sammy wasn't about shaping history. It was about honoring friendship. Yet that simple act expanded his legacy beyond music and film. People remembered him as someone reliable when stakes were real. That reputation outlived trends. Long after the Rat Pack dissolved, stories like this endured, not as myth, but as evidence of character. Dean never corrected the clownish image people projected onto him. It served him well. Underestimation created freedom. He could act decisively without scrutiny. That night in Vegas exemplified that strategy. He didn't disrupt the system. He navigated it humanely. His legacy rests not just in records sold or films made, but in moments where power met conscience and didn't win. Dean Martin proved that decency could survive in ruthless spaces. Sometimes, that's the most radical contribution of all. This story matters because it reveals how change often begins, not through revolutions, but through decisions made in uncomfortable rooms. The incident didn't dismantle systems or rewrite laws. It reshaped expectations. It showed that silence wasn't the only survival strategy. Someone watching that night learned a new possibility. That ripple matters. Today, the entertainment industry speaks openly about inclusion, but those conversations rest on foundations laid quietly decades earlier. Acts like Dean's didn't solve injustice, but they challenged its comfort. They made cruelty less convenient. Sammy's dignity being defended sent a message that talent didn't require humiliation as payment. That message still resonates. In modern discussions about allyship, this moment feels strikingly relevant. True allyship isn't performative. It doesn't announce itself. It intervenes when cost is real. That's why this night endures. It wasn't symbolic. It was practical. It didn't demand recognition. It accepted risk. Stories like this remind us that courage doesn't belong to any era. It adapts. It waits for moments that test character. And when those moments arrive, the choice is simple but never easy. Look away, or stand beside someone. Dean Martin chose the latter. That choice still instructs us. Every legacy contains defining moments, even if history overlooks them. For Dean Martin, this was one. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was decisive. He chose action over comfort, loyalty over convenience. That choice didn't transform him overnight. It revealed who he already was. Sammy carried that knowledge forward, not as debt, but as strength. Their friendship deepened through shared understanding rather than words. Neither man sought validation for what happened. They allowed it to exist privately, uncorrupted by spectacle. That restraint preserved its meaning. The world often measures impact through visibility. This moment challenges that metric. Its power lay in discretion. One calm sentence, one hand on a shoulder, altered an outcome. That's the weight of choice. It reminds us that we are always shaping the environments we occupy, whether intentionally or not. Dean shaped that room by refusing to accept humiliation as normal. That refusal lingered longer than fear ever could. In the end, the story isn't about mafia power or celebrity. It's about responsibility. When you can intervene and you don't, silence becomes consent. Dean Martin didn't consent, and because of that, one man stood taller, one room shifted, and one quiet standard was raised forever. From the audience's perspective, the night passed like any other glamorous Vegas evening. Songs were sung, jokes landed, drinks flowed. No one applauded courage because no one was meant to see it. That invisibility was intentional. Dean and Sammy understood that survival sometimes required subtlety. Yet behind the curtain, performers felt it. They sensed a shift in the air, a reminder that dignity could exist even under pressure. Some carried that lesson quietly into future encounters. Others remembered it years later, when faced with their own tests. The audience never knew why Sammy's smile seemed stronger afterward, or why Dean's presence carried new weight. They only felt the result. That's how influence often works. It doesn't announce itself. It settles into behavior, tone, confidence. History tends to spotlight dramatic confrontations, but this moment resisted drama. It was controlled, measured, intentional. That restraint preserved its power. By keeping the incident private, Dean protected Sammy from becoming a symbol or spectacle. He defended a man, not an idea. That distinction mattered deeply. The audience left entertained, unaware they had witnessed something rare. Courage without performance. Loyalty without branding. Those who knew, knew. Those who didn't, still benefited. Sometimes the most important moments aren't meant to be seen, only felt long after the lights dim. Courage is often imagined as loud, defiant, dramatic. This wasn't that. It was calm, controlled, almost invisible. Dean Martin didn't raise his voice or posture aggressively. He didn't provoke attention. He simply refused to accept cruelty. That refusal required discipline. It required understanding consequences and choosing to act anyway. Courage without applause is harder because it offers no reward, no validation, only personal accountability. Dean accepted that. He didn't seek gratitude from Sammy or admiration from others. He moved on, as if nothing had happened. That's what made it powerful. The act existed for its own sake. In a culture obsessed with recognition, this kind of courage feels rare. It asks a simple question. Who are you when no one is watching? Dean answered that question quietly. Sammy absorbed the answer deeply. Their relationship was strengthened not by words, but by trust earned under pressure. That trust endured longer than fame. Long after stages faded, that moment remained intact, untouched by reinterpretation. Courage without applause doesn't age. It doesn't depend on context. It simply exists as proof of character. That's why this story continues to resonate. It reminds us that the truest form of bravery often happens offstage, in moments no one plans to remember. Decades later, the world looks different, yet familiar. Power still tests boundaries. Humiliation still hides behind jokes. Silence still feels safer than intervention. That's why this story endures. It offers a blueprint without preaching. It shows that one person's choice can alter dynamics, even briefly. The lesson isn't about celebrity or mob influence. It's about responsibility. When you have leverage, how do you use it? Dean used this to protect, not dominate. That distinction remains relevant. Many people will never face a room like that one in Vegas. But everyone faces moments where silence feels easier. This story asks what we're willing to risk for someone else's dignity. Sammy didn't ask to be defended. That matters. Allyship that waits for permission often arrives too late. Dean acted because it was right, not because it was requested. That mindset transcends era. It applies anywhere power meets vulnerability. The lesson survived because it wasn't attached to trends. It wasn't framed as progress or rebellion. It was human. That humanity keeps it alive. Long after the suits, stages, and smoke-filled rooms disappeared, the choice still echoes. Stand beside someone, or look away. The simplicity of that choice is what makes it timeless. History often ends stories with triumph or tragedy. This one ends with continuity. Life went on. Shows continued. Vegas remained Vegas. Yet something invisible endured. Dean and Sammy never dramatized the night, never framed it as legend. That restraint preserved its truth. Over time, the moment blended into their lives, influencing decisions subtly. That's how real impact works. It doesn't interrupt life. It integrates into it. Dean remained charming. Sammy remained brilliant, but both carried an unspoken understanding of what loyalty meant. The world never demanded that understanding from them. They carried it anyway. This quiet ending resists closure because it wasn't meant to conclude. It was meant to inform. Stories like this don't ask for admiration. They ask for reflection. They challenge us to reconsider what strength looks like. Not dominance, not fear, but presence. The ability to say enough calmly and mean it. That's what happened that night. No hero pose. No villain punished. Just a boundary drawn and respected. That's why history rarely records it. It doesn't fit neat narratives. But for those who lived it, and those who learn it later, The ending is clear. Dignity was defended. And sometimes, that's the most complete ending a story can have. Some moments never make headlines, yet shape legacies forever. This was one of them. Loyalty spoke softly, courage stood firm, and dignity walked out of a room undefeated.